Good morning. I'm Jake, and this is my wife, Liz. We first came to Fountain Street Church as college students attending various lectures. We heard the words of an environmentalist, a feminist, and a scholar of Gnosticism. As someone raised in a very conservative Christian Reformed church, I think some part of me at that point said, a church that's willing to have a feminist and an environmentalist, And then it wasn't until we were engaged to be married that Liz and I decided to worship here. We were planning our wedding, and it really made us think about our spiritual journey. We knew we wanted a ceremony that was meaningful and spiritual, but not bound by any particular religious doctrine. We wanted it to be a reflection of our values, our commitment to compassion, and our love. The person we wanted to join us in marriage would have to be open-minded, inspired, joyful, someone who shares our values. That person was our senior minister, Fred Wooden. Now, I think Fred might get this from time to time where people are looking for someone to get married and they think, maybe a nice liberal church I can join and then can get married and maybe he'll never see us again, So I appreciate that Fred, never hinted at that. He believed in us and he performed a beautiful ceremony, drove all the way out to Newaygo for us, and it's just very meaningful to know that he was willing to kind of have faith in us and have faith that we would contribute and be members of this community.
We both remember the first worship service we attended here. It was April 4th, 2010, a year when Easter Sunday fell on the anniversary of the death of Martin Luther King. That day, Fred spoke, and he helped us to understand that it isn't enough to have our own dreams for the world we want to create. We have to share our dreams if we want them to become greater than ourselves. Together, we can accomplish more than we ever could alone. Often, as liberal thinkers, we are defined by what we are not: non-traditional, non-conformist, non-violent, non-denominational. The beautiful thing about Fountain Street Church is that it allows us to be defined by what we are: a community of people who believe in each other, celebrate diversity, fight injustice, question everything, and provide a sanctuary for all people.
This year we took the opportunity to become leaders for Tower Club, our middle school youth group, and it has been a rewarding and transformative experience for us. It's been wonderful to hang out with some of your children and some of your young people. What a great community. We feel truly blessed to have this community. Welcome to Fountain Street Church. You belong here.
that's just a taste of the versatility of this instrument we have. Marilyn often has surprises hidden up her sleeve when it comes to making the organ do interesting things. A few passages to make our minds turn a slightly different angle. In the Torah portion today, since my colleague has gestured to the gospel earlier and the story of the Transfiguration, and of course, for me, Transfiguration is a musical reference to a Strauss tone poem and a Schoenberg quartet, but that's another story altogether. In the Torah portion, called Mishpatim, meaning laws of justice, all the laws that are being laid out at Sinai are being being listed and recited one after the other. And at the end of it, it says, Moses then wrote down all the commandments, and early in the morning he set up an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel, and he designated some young men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed bulls as offerings of well-being to God. Moses took one part of the blood and put it in basins, and the other part of the blood he dashed against the altar, flinging it at the stones. Then he took the record of the covenant and read it aloud to the people, and they said, "All that God has spoken we will faithfully do." Moses took the blood and dashed it on the people, literally flung it like droplets on all the Israelites, and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that God now makes with you concerning all these commands." Turning to more modern thoughts, Carl Sagan, may he rest in peace and may his memory be a blessing, at one point said, "To say that love makes the world go around is to go too far. The earth spins because it did so as it was formed, and there has been nothing to stop it since. But the nearly maniacal devotion to sex and love by most of the plants, animals, and microbes with which we are familiar is a pervasive and striking aspect of life on earth. It cries out for explanation. What is all this in aid of? What is the torrent of passion and obsession about? Why will organisms go without sleep, without food, gladly put themselves in mortal danger for sex?" R.D. Laing, a great psychiatrist of the 20th century, made this observation: "Life is a sexually transmitted disease, and the mortality rate is 100%. Margaret Atwood, who stood in this pulpit a few years ago as a guest of the Women's Studies Consortium, wrote, "I knew what love was supposed to be: obsession with undertones of nausea." And finally, so you giggle heartily, Tallulah Bankhead, who observed, "I'm as pure as the driven slush." God bless Judge Roy Moore of Alabama. He needs a lot of blessing because he stood in the doorway to protect traditional marriage and discovered that he cannot hold back this tide any more than King Canute can hold back the ocean. But for him and for millions, the idea of same-sex marriage seems to threaten the foundations of their world. Here I'm quoting him. "Same-sex marriage will be the ultimate destruction of our country," says Judge Moore. On Good Morning America, he prophesied, quote, "Do they stop with one man, or one woman and one woman? Or do they go to multiple marriages? Do they go to marriages between men and their daughters and women and their sons?" Whenever I hear this prophecy of social collapse, I recall a scene from the 1984 movie Ghostbusters, in which they're trying to convince the mayor that calamity is coming. And so they harangue him in his office saying, "Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies, rivers and seas boiling, 40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes, dogs and cats living together." This is my second of 2 sermons on sex and religion. And yes, To our modern and refined liberal minds, it does seem outlandish that uncontrolled sex would lead to social collapse. But if we dig a little further, we can find something real to why Roy Moore and those like him are so upset. And that's my task today. My late mother-in-law grew up in a place called Deal Island, Maryland. It is an island in the southern tidewater of the Eastern Shore. Very southern in culture, connected by a causeway that was built in her lifetime. Now, it should be pointed out that black people lived on the island too, but in their own town, a town that was not listed on any map and which had no name except a name that I cannot pronounce. I tell you all this because when Wendy and I got married, we were in Chicago, and her mother and father came along with my parents. And of course, being in seminary, we held it at the seminary chapel, and all the students came. It was a very high-powered crowd with deans and professors of all kinds. Afterward, my mother-in-law, who had endured it as properly as she couldn't help but comment to my wife about a couple that was a member of our community, a fellow student who had married each other. She was white, he was black, and she said, "Just the thought of a black man with a white woman makes me sick to my stomach." Now, I'm not saying this to criticize her or to comment on the pervasiveness of racism. I am saying this to note how she described her feeling, one of disgust. Now, my wife and I don't have the same feeling. These are two people we love and have cared for as friends. Most of us don't anymore, and many cultures have never cared about who married whom in terms of color or race. But many people do, and many still do. Behind the histrionics of my mother-in-law and Judge Roy Moore is this notion of disgust as the basis for some of these feelings that people have. Last week, in my thoughts on religion and sex, I commented that they were essentially competing powers. Sex is so appealing, note Carl Sagan, that religion is in competition with it and feels obliged to control it by laws and by outright silence. This week I'm commenting on how religion tries to manage sex and other things, but notably sex, and it's by harnessing that thing called disgust. Leon Kass, a writer and physician, spoke of something he called the yuck factor. He means that negative response we have to a practice, an idea, or even a people that he regards as being an important indicator that something is wrong. Our innate sense of disgust is a clue that something bad is present, and we should treat it with some gravity. Trust your gut is quite literally what he means. If it makes you sick, probably it will, right? And of course, disgust does have a real purpose. Jonathan Haidt, in his book, The Righteous Mind, says the emotion of disgust evolved to optimize responses to our omnivore's dilemma, by which he means that we will eat anything. But he goes on to say individuals who had a properly calibrated sense of disgust were able to consume more calories than those who were more easily disgusted and got sick less often than those who were less disgusted, and so our genes tended to be perpetuated. A healthy sense of disgust is good for one's life in terms of food and drink. But, and this is the biggest point, we learn to be disgusted at more than the things that make us physically ill. We learn that. That is not innate, that is taught. Let's consider babies for a moment. There's a creature there that doesn't know right from wrong, good from bad, tasty from disgusting. And they find out by what? Putting anything they can in their mouths, including their own bodily products, as we all know. Millennia prove that mostly we figured out that's not good for us, but it is generally underlined by a parent whose reaction the first time a baby wants to sample such material is one of horror, shrieking, and disgust. A face that is universally recognized as being repulsive. You can show the disgusted face anywhere on the planet and everyone will know that means disgusting. But of course, once we learn that face when it comes to things that are truly disgusting, we see it applied to things that are questionably, or at least optionally, disgusting. As a child of the South myself, I can still feel the deep roots of racism that were planted in me by my culture. My parents worked very hard to undo them. To this day, I can remember as a boy of maybe 6, saying out loud that our cleaning woman, a woman of color, smelled bad. A few years ago, as an adult, I read Henry Louis Gates' autobiography, where he notes that his grandmother said that white people smell bad. De disgustibus non disputandum est, I suppose. Our revulsions are often learned. And our revulsion about sex is also a learned revulsion. There's nothing inherently unpleasant about sex, even for children who discover what fun it is to explore themselves. Every baby knows how much fun it is, and every parent says, no! And they make the same face they did about those other things, remember? It does not take much work even for an infant brain to connect the dots. Bowel movements are disgusting, urine is disgusting, everything down there is disgusting. The Bible goes on to make sure that every male learns, this is in the covenant to which I just referred, that every male emission, as it is called, must be followed instantly by a bath of purification. Now you know why we don't like to cuddle. I'll let that sink in for a moment. But every woman must sequester herself during her menses, bathe when it ends, and after childbirth must remain removed from society altogether until the lochia is completely gone, plus 7 days to make sure it doesn't sneak back when you're not looking. St. Augustine, who was no fan of sex except when before he became a saint, I'm not kidding. If you read his Confessions, and I'm veering from my text, so God help us all, he is trying at some point to elaborate his approach to Christianity, and at some point he records that he said, God, give me chastity, but not yet. A prayer we have all uttered from time to time. St. Augustine, who became no fan of sex later in his life, wrote in Latin, Inter feces et urinam nascimur. We are born between the feces and the urine. It's a biological fact, and he interprets from that the filthiness of the endeavor. That it's disgusting. It's all disgusting. Sex is disgusting. The only reason to have it is to have a child, and if you have it any other time, that's disgusting. But let's face it, bodily fluids are a little icky. Diseases are communicated by blood, by phlegm, saliva. Maybe some of this revulsion is kind of natural. And yet, on the other hand, we depend upon those fluids. They keep us alive. Medicine, the theory of medicine for centuries was a theory called the theory of the humors, that we had 4 humors, fluids flowing around inside of us, and that when we were ill, we were out of balance with our inner fluids. It held sway until the 19th century. Everywhere you turn, in fact, fluids are involved in religion. What is Christian communion but wine that comes also from the Kaddish cup of Judaism? Muslims make wudu. They wash their hands and their heads before going to prayer. In East Asia, there are troughs outside of every Buddhist temple and Shinto shrine in which one washes one's hands and one's mouth. Hindu rituals involve pouring milk or clarified butter over images of gods. In Japan, I walked for 100 kilometers to reach Nakisan, a sacred waterfall. Fluids are everywhere and part of the religious symbolism of the world. And the most powerful fluid in the religion, the most potent one, is blood. In the Torah portion today, Moses blesses the people by throwing blood on them. I don't think of anything less cleansing than blood, but in religion, we speak of blood as cleansing, washed in the blood of the Lamb. I wouldn't think of that as being anywhere near clean, and yet that is a powerful image. Noah, who will come onto this stage later today, will not, but in the story should, sacrifice animals at the end of the ark experience, shedding their blood, pouring it out to please God. The temple in Jerusalem was a factory of animal sacrifice, hundreds of animals being dispatched every day to propitiate God. And yes, maybe Christians don't actually kill animals, but it celebrates the brutal death of its founder and then invites people to drink his blood in honor of it. Blood is a very powerful fluid. It is the substance of life and the means to death. And that brings me back, not ironically, to Judge Roy Moore. He is a devout conservative Christian. His fear and loathing of gay marriage, forgive me for borrowing from Hunter Thompson to describe Roy Moore, his fear and loathing is profound. And he is not unusual. Millions are disgusted by homosexuals the same way they're disgusted by black or brown people, driven by a fear and loathing that is rooted in sexuality, in the fluids that somehow in one case consecrate and in another defile. For centuries, that disgust was often cleansed by the blood of those we found disgusting. Lynching. Why did we lynch so many black men? Because they were a threat to the purity of white women. That's sex, in case you haven't figured out. Just the thought of it was a punishable event. Not the black man thinking, the white person thinking it. Some people think the pejorative term faggot was applied to gays because it reminded them of the bundle of sticks that were thrown on the fire to be burnt like sinners. And in truth, many a male homosexual gay man was burnt alive in order to purify them of their sins. I do find it astonishing that so many devout Christians consider the blood of Christ to be sacred, but the blood of gays, lesbians, transgender, people of color, and women in all states to be disgusting. How odd. The phrase fear and loathing, if you were here last week, may remind you of the phrase I used, fear and fascination. That is what one scholar described the experience of religious encounter, being both terrified and fascinated. I think sex is almost sacred because it brings all three emotions together. Fear, Lord knows, fascination, judging by our media, but also disgust, loathing. They swirl about in our collective minds like fluids themselves, making sex thrilling, terrifying, sacred, profane, delicious, disgusting, healing, wounding, creative, destructive, uplifting, demeaning, warm and cold, tender and violent. All the human motions and experiences can be experienced in that sexual encounter. Sex is when we return, if only momentarily, to that infant part of ourselves when everything, mind and body, sense and sensation, self and other, were still one beautiful unity. When you want it, it is heaven. When you don't, it is hell. This is not the sermon I planned to give. I was going to end up with some really cool stuff. But when you enter the whirlpool of sex, the cool stuff goes away really fast. Because plans rarely turn out as planned when it comes to sex. Can I get an amen? Yes. In fact, at the end of this sermon, I found myself thinking of a poem by Jorge Carrera Andrade that is about death, but it uses this wonderful phrase, I find myself once more mother naked. What a fabulous phrase, mother naked, that sense of being brand new and yet completely exposed. I think sex and religion, when they are at their most intense and intentional, is a place where we feel mother naked, and should, where we are most vulnerable, most exposed, most fragile, and hoping to be embraced in that state. But we know it won't always be. That sometimes we are reduced to that and we are harmed instead. Or we feel foolish and stumble about. Is it any wonder then that so many, when they feel so exposed, feel the need to wrap themselves in religious myths and dreams? Because if they really had to face the sacred without anything, would that not be so terrifying as to be unbearable? And likewise, when we think about ourselves as sexual beings, is there any moment when we are more dangerously vulnerable than when we hope that the other person will receive us with their bodies? No wonder we live in fear. No wonder that we let fear and loathing become the clothing for our infant innocence. The risk of being loathed and feared is so great we have to bring it out there first to make sure we don't get hurt. And it is sad that in this thing that is so animal and so sacred and so personal and so universal, when we bring our softest self present to another, that we are so wrapped in fear and loathing that we sometimes forget it is there at all. Oh, my friends, we have so much to do. There is so far we have to go. When I contemplate that in this most elemental reality we enjoy, the congress of bodies designed to share affection, to be close in a way that only bodies can know and only souls can love, that we still struggle so much and stand apart so far. Religion may not be able to help us here, but at the very least, it should be able to get out of the way. I don't know what that answer is, my friends. But I do know that we all have bodies that love and long and wish to be close. And I wish we lived in a world in which that happened when we wanted it to, how we wanted it to, and that we could rejoice in the pleasure of our being. See what happens when you talk about sex. I am undone, and I stand mother naked before you, a soul wishing only to be loved and to love you too. Amen and amen.